Most of my dreams seem to come true, and I'm so thankful that they do.
Michael Jackson was a true modern hero, working tirelessly to heal the world.
We love you, Michael Jackson.
Break it down.
His sidekick. I feel that that's what I am in life.
I like to sneak into theaters without being noticed sometimes. Sometimes there's really nothing you can do about it. It's the price you have to pay.
Join Michael as he tours the globe fighting for justice and a better world.
Through music and song, I think my brother's doing a wonderful job and just making it known and bringing an awareness to the nations and the world needs.
Heal the Kids is about doing something about making a difference and trying to help adults and parents realize that it is our power to change the world that our children live in.
One wish? There's so many I have, but one of them, one of the main ones, would be simple as making the whole world happy and world peace, and that is part of the reason why I do what I do.
This is the secret story of the world's biggest star. The Earth Song, the inside story of Michael Jackson. This rare footage from Japan captures Michael Jackson at work doing the one thing he really loved. At the time this footage was shot, Michael was already the biggest star on the planet. Michael lived a high-pressure life, and he was constantly in the public eye as a recording artist and a performer. The relentless demands of a life in the spotlight placed constant stress on his time, leaving him very little space for his own life. Regardless of how busy he was in his professional life, however, Michael always found time to do good work for charity.
Arigatou. Aishitemasu.
He didn't limit himself to just his home patch. Michael selflessly gave his time to do good work all around the world. Michael had embarked upon a personal crusade to make children's lives better, and he was totally dedicated to achieving his goal. Throughout his life, he did everything he possibly could to make children's lives better, even if it meant giving up his rare and precious free time.
Everybody wants to be seen to be doing work for charity, and inevitably the cynic in us suggests that some people do it in order to raise their profile. There was no need for Michael Jackson to raise his profile. He was already the most famous man on the planet. He was genuine in his charity work. If you listen to the speech, for example, he gives at Exeter Football Club, you can see how passionate he is about the need to do charitable work for children. He genuinely believed that he had a responsibility and a duty to help them.
Sadly, we live in a state of fear. Every day we hear of war on the news, on the radio, and television. In the newspapers, always of war. We hear of nations hurting each other, of neighbors hurting each other, of families hurting each other, and of children killing each other. We must learn to live and love each other before it's too late. We have to stop. We have to stop the prejudice. We have to stop the hating. We have to stop living in fear of our own neighbors. That's for all the children of the world. I love you.
I think the problem with Michael's charity work is it's largely unreported because, the spectacular lifestyle that he used to lead and the constant publicity around simple things like going to the shops for Michael Jackson was far more exciting for the media than what he was potentially doing to help children in Africa. So it's largely unreported, I think, Michael's charity work, and overlooked, which is sad because I'm certain that he was very passionate about helping children particularly.
Well, Michael did do a lot of charity work. He set up the Heal the World Foundation, which sort of helps out underprivileged children.
Are we blind to the fact that our children are raging against the indifference, crying out against the abandonment, of thundering against the neglect? Heal the Kids is about doing something about making a difference and trying to help adults and parents realize that it is our power to change the world that our children live in. Who among us would have believed that the sound of children at their playgrounds would be replaced by the sound of automatic machine gun fire at our schools? That the sound of little girls skipping rope would be overshadowed by the frantic shrills of children dodging bullets? Yet, instead of loving our children more, we installed metal detectors in our school.
He brought them into Netherlands and gave them some sort of hopefully pleasant experiences, and I think he did try to give a lot back, particularly for children and for Africa.
When he suffered the burns during the Pepsi commercial as well, the money raised, well, the money he received from Pepsi went to a burns unit, which isn't necessarily a charity, but is also a good cause.
When he goes to Russia, the state honours him for the work he does for charity. When he goes to South Africa, Nelson Mandela himself takes the time to address the press and to describe his admiration for Michael Jackson.
I'm very happy indeed to be able to host him, even for just a few minutes. And he has made a great contribution to art, to music, and I'm very happy that he is in our country.
As far as Michael's relationship with Nelson Mandela, I believe they worked together on a project tackling AIDS, which obviously has blighted communities across Africa, HIV and AIDS, and continues to do so to this day.
I think when Michael Jackson met Nelson Mandela, you could see on the footage that there was kind of a mutual respect there. And I think to Michael Jackson, to be respected by Nelson Mandela, who's probably the most important black figure globally, was something really special for him. And I know they supported each other with their respective charities.
I think they worked on sort of like human rights projects and things like that. And I think Michael went some way to kind of supporting Nelson on those projects.
I love you. I love you.
I think Michael Jackson comes across as a very gentle, sensitive and caring person. And somebody who cares for the underdog.
Well, I think you'd have to be a very, very cynical person indeed not to believe that Michael was involved in charity for the best possible motive. He genuinely wanted to help and felt he had a duty to help.
One of the reasons that Michael was so determined to help children and make their lives better was the fact that his own childhood had been blighted by a demanding workload.
There's 9 of us. My parents actually had 10 children, and my brother Marlon had a twin. His name was Brandon, but he died as an infant. So there's 9 of us.
Michael became famous at a very early age. So from the age of 5 onwards, really, he had no childhood. He didn't have what the rest of us had and be able to grow up. He was being groomed to be a member of a group, and from the age of 8 he was performing and doing what was called the Chitlin circuit of clubs around Chicago.
As a result of his punishing work schedule, Michael was deeply unhappy as a child. He was also very lonely and desperate to form real friendships with other children.
I think Michael said many times that his experience as a child and how he wasn't able to do the things that other children took for granted, like going to school and playing with his friends and stuff, really had an effect on him.
He also was thrust into this media goldfish bowl from really the age of 8 onwards. After that, the man enjoyed no privacy in any aspect of his life at any time.
I think the most difficult thing was my father managed me ever since I was 7 years old, ever since I started in this business. And to break away from that was the hardest thing to do.
I think undoubtedly, if, as is alleged, Michael Jackson went through some of the abuse that he's said to have suffered in his childhood, it was bound to have affected him. It would affect anybody.
He always said he'd been abused by his father, which took the form of name-calling, undermining him, and also on occasion physical beatings. So he was very scared all his life of his father.
Whether that was necessarily in such a bad way, perhaps it actually inspired him to go on and do better things, because he felt he had to sort of overcome some of the difficulties he'd faced in his childhood and almost prove to himself that he was kind of a good person, if you like.
The lack of a normal childhood was to prove a major factor in shaping Michael's character.
My father molested me sexually, and I don't like it. I don't like the way it feels. And to this day, this is my husband, and he can vouch for this. I will not have a relationship with him because of that. But I love him dearly, but I cannot.
It's kind of difficult. I have to exclude my sister, LaToya. I try to explain this the best way I possibly can. Being African American, we always use the word beat. My father beat me, or oh, I got a good beating today, or if you don't stop, girl, I'm gonna beat you. But it's not. It's getting a spanking is what it really is. But it's just something that we say as a people. It was never something that we didn't deserve.
It is all too obvious that the shadow of his unhappy childhood lingered on into Michael's adult life.
He may well have been stripped of his boyhood when he was young, which perhaps as an adult has led him to have sort of a boy-adult conflict, if you like, whereby he may feel that he wants to be a child because he never had the opportunity to be a child.
I think his childhood has had an impact on his later life. I think anyone's childhood has an impact on their later life, but he was never out of the limelight. I don't think he's ever known what it's been like to be a normal child.
And I think he was trying to, throughout the rest of his life, establish the things he'd missed out on and hold on to them.
All of the hard work did pay its dividends in commercial terms. The Jackson 5 soon became one of the hottest acts on the Motown label.
Well, I think that the Jackson 5 really was the training ground for Michael Jackson. It's where he cut his teeth and where he rose to prominence.
I think the Jackson 5 stuff helped to sort of shape him as a performer. It was put him on the stage from a very young age and became the thing that he knew how to do, to sing and to dance, even if perhaps other areas of his life he wasn't quite sure how to react in them.
I think right from the start, the onlooker could see that Michael, he was the standout performer. He had the best voice, and he really rose to the front of that group, and everyone else kind of was his supporting artists, as opposed to he was the star. He established himself as the star early on.
It wasn't long before Michael's outstanding talent was recognised, and he was soon making the first of a stream of hit singles as a solo artist. His success soon eclipsed the waning star of the Jackson 5. It was to be 12 years before Michael worked with the other Jacksons,
The Jackson 5 are getting back together. We're doing a Jackson 5 reunion album and a tour in '97, and it's going to be with all the original members of the Jackson 5, Michael, myself, Tito, Marlon, Randy, and Jackie.
I don't think that it would ever have worked reforming the Jackson 5.
The last time we were together was 12 years ago, and we've been writing a lot of songs, and we just feel that we should go out there and do it one more time. We're doing a lot of different things now. We're producing television and film and animation and things like that. So we get this feeling in our bones to go out there and tour one more time. And so we thought it would be best to do it now.
By then, the Jacksons had been almost forgotten. But the return of Michael reignited interest, and the demand for concert tickets was as strong as ever.
I think when he initially broke away to do his solo stuff, the Ben album and things like that, and he briefly went back for a time, but it just wasn't working. I think there was some resentment that he was the big star, and he was just on a different path to the rest of the Jackson 5, I think.
By 1978, Michael Jackson was a big star. The release of his new album, entitled Off the Wall, was the vehicle which propelled him to superstardom.
I think Off the Wall was, I think it came after a few solo albums that didn't go so well, and it kind of took the world by surprise to some extent, because I think people were sort of thinking, oh, well, where's Michael Jackson's solo career going? Is he just, a one-trick pony as part of a bigger group? And I think, the success of that early album, after a few less successful albums, really sort of propelled him into the spotlight.
The album was a real breakthrough in musical terms, and it marked the beginning of a global phenomenon which was to last forever.
Well, I think it represented a coming of age for Michael Jackson. He'd always had this boyish image before that, a cute little child star. He teamed up with Quincy Jones at that period and developed a new sound and went a bit more up-tempo and a bit more risque, as it were, trying to shed that boyhood image that he'd had before and move into the next phase of his career.
As a genuine global superstar, Michael's life changed forever. All around the planet, adoring crowds haunted his every waking moment. This footage of Michael in Japan is typical of the fraught experience which made up his daily life. For someone as famous as Michael, limos are too recognizable. But even the ruse of traveling in a beaten-up old van can't help to disguise the passenger's true identity from his ever-present fans.
I think being in the media spotlight all the time did affect Michael. He was never out of the spotlight from a very young age, and I think that has got to have an effect on him. But I'm not sure he ever knew or can remember a time when it was different, to know kind of what the difference would be.
I have incredible disguises. I can fool my own mother, and I enjoy doing it because I get to see life the way it really is sometimes, which is fun.
If you look, for example, at the footage of the ad hoc trip that he made with Uri Geller and David Blaine, we can see that immediately the press bodies get so excited that Michael's actually knocked to the ground, and he's physically threatened by this.
I've never, ever, ever seen anything like that, and I hope I will never see it again, because Michael was crushed. He actually fell on the platform. Now let me tell you this, if Michael wasn't in the shape that he is in, he would have stayed there.
If we look, for example, at a trip to Moscow to try and do something that any tourist would do, all he wants to do is to have a look at Red Square. Again, there's this frenzy that surrounds him, and he's thwarted in the most simple and innocent of ambitions.
think he was inadvertently often put into the spotlight because of the things he did to himself, but he must have known that if he changed his appearance the way he did, it would attract some coverage because of the superstar he was, because of the success he'd had with the Jackson 5, and because of the success of his solo career.
Life for Michael Jackson in the spotlight was very, very difficult. He was constantly surrounded by lenses being thrust into his face, by the clicking of shutters.
I like to sneak into theaters without being noticed sometimes. Sometimes there's really nothing you can do about it. It's the price you have to pay.
I think the media glare is a problem for all celebrities. Lots of them caught media attention, and that's why we don't have sympathy for them. And I actually believe that Michael Jackson loved the attention of the media. I actually feel that he tried to publicise himself in such a grandeur, over-the-top way, and it backfired slightly for him.
Michael's growing global reputation was cemented by the release of Thriller. It was this album which introduced the moonwalk and sealed Michael's status as the world's biggest entertainer.
Thriller was a huge album. I think it's the biggest selling album of all time, something like 110 million copies worldwide.
And it still sells vast amounts, even before Michael's death.
Whether that can ever be done again, who knows?
I pretty much did the album and just sat back and watched because it was another one of my dreams.
I think the big thing with Thriller was sort of some of the videos surrounding that album that were made. Immediately you think of the Thriller video itself with the ghouls dancing.
I always love watching that, especially the children when they wear all the gear and everything and imitate me. I think it's fun. It's done in good taste, it's fun.
But to be honest, I just remember being blown away by the album. I mean, that solo for Eddie Van Halen, that was just amazing.
It was just a phenomenal album, really. I think it's gone on to influence, certainly, Afro-American artists, you know, Kanye West and Mariah Carey and all these huge global stars. They all, you know, tipped their hat towards Michael Jackson and recognised the effect that his music had on them when they were growing up.
Some people say his music is just dance music, and that's just wrong. What really stands out for me is the quality of the arrangements, and if you think of guys like Quincy Jones, and they just some of the incredible riffs, and they're not easy to create. You think of the synthesizer bass line in Thriller, or the repeating lines in Beat It or Billie Jean. They're just tremendous.
It was the Thriller album that really transcended Michael from singing sensation to global megastar.
When I was just real little, I used to watch Sammy Davis, Fred Astaire, and James Brown, and just dancing about the house. So I don't remember not dancing.
Michael Jackson not only had some great music, he actually lived the songs on stage as a dancer, as an entertainer. And I guess some of the unique moves were thought up during his hours of isolation. You can imagine him just sitting in the bedroom thinking up these different dance moves.
The world kind of stopped breathing when Michael unleashed his moonwalk at the Motown 25 event. It just blew everybody away.
How many people have you seen trying to do a moonwalk and just completely failing?
It really changed the landscape of dance performance, I think. A lot of people say that it wasn't his invention, that people were doing it before him. That's kind of irrelevant now. You know, it's Michael Jackson's dance, and there's no real argument there, I don't think.
There's always world record attempts to see how many people can do the Thriller dance. It was something that was, you know, that people tried to emulate and still try to do. And I don't think we've kind of seen anything similar to that since perhaps Elvis, maybe. Justin
Timberlake, Britney Spears, I think they've pointed towards him as sort of an inspiration for some of their dance moves. JLS, who sort of topped the charts recently in the UK as well, have sort of, you know, said he's one of their inspirations.
I just think that his performance, the way he danced, the way he entertained, the way he used his body in that way is completely unique.
The growing pressures of fame eventually caused Michael to turn to plastic surgery. Initially, the results were very successful.
I think the plastic surgery that Michael had did affect how people looked at him, because I think it showed a man that wasn't entirely happy with himself. It showed that perhaps underneath his entertainer exterior there was perhaps quite a troubled man underneath that was trying to change himself.
There are two different ways of looking at cosmetic surgery. It may be that somebody has goes under the knife and feels quite satisfied that whatever it was that they were concerned about has been improved or enhanced in some way. There is another way of looking at it, there's another extreme, whereby the person who is under the knife is constantly seeking perfection and feeling, I'm not meeting that, and therefore goes under the knife again, and therefore goes under the knife again, and so on. There is a term for this, which is body dysmorphic disorder.
One of the things that Michael said his father had always teased him about was his look, and his father had said many times that Michael was ugly. Now, it may be reading too much into that, but it clearly left a mark on Michael.
And the transformation from the days when he was in the Jackson 5 to in his 50s was incredibly different looking.
I think the fact that Michael Jackson had plastic surgery kept him in the limelight, whether for the, obviously not for probably good reasons, but undoubtedly Michael Jackson's appearance was the subject of much speculation and talk over the years. I mean, it changed significantly in the sort of 30 years or so since he became a solo artist. And in some ways, I think, having that surgery, which he undoubtedly had a lot of, contributed to helping his career because it kept him in the limelight.
I guess it could be that he's trying to stay in the headlines, trying to ensure that he stays in the public eye, that people are wondering, is it true, is it not?
Michael never looked better, and manager Frank DeLeo was on hand to protect his clients' interests when faced with too much press intrusion.
I find it very terrible that some of the stuff that is written, particularly about plastic surgery, and the majority of it, not the majority, all of it is garbage and rubbish. And if that's the best thing that's the only thing they can figure out to do with their life, then they're pretty sick people.
I would say that he was very aware that he had had cosmetic surgery himself. It would be very difficult to go through a process and then to think actually that this hasn't happened. But fooling the public is something different, I think.
I think one of the most difficult things for fans of Michael Jackson was Michael's constant denial about plastic surgery. And I think for neutrals, this was also a difficult thing because it just didn't feel right. Michael Jackson says that he's had just a couple of minor operations on his face, and yet we can see that there's huge changes taking place. And I think this kind of caused a mistrust between the public and Michael Jackson. I think the fans and the public wanted openness when it comes to his surgery. I mean, he says himself that in Hollywood, having plastic surgery is the same as going to the hairdressers. And so if that's the case, why not just be open about it and honest and move on?
As he grew even more famous, Michael continued to resort to plastic surgery as he sought to achieve the perfect look. In the longer term, the results of too much plastic surgery were to prove a disaster. His constant desire to reinvent himself eventually resulted in a face which was a gross parody of its former self. This made Michael into a laughingstock and damaged his reputation forever. The release of the Bad album continued to propel Michael's reputation to even greater heights of fame.
It's just a series of collecting songs and writing songs in my mind. over a period of years or whatever. And it's hard to say how one creates music because it's hard for me to take credit. I feel it's more spiritual and heavenly than I can't take credit for it.
The Bad album was a very diverse album. You know, you've got sort of more disco-y, sort of poppy things like the Bad song itself. And then you've got sort of slower, more romancy songs like I Just Can't Stop Loving You. And that, the significance of the Bad album was really, I think, probably a lot of it down to the tour, which sort of came about alongside it. You know, he sold out dates around the world. I think he actually broke a Guinness World Record as well for the sort of the number of people who turned up for his concerts at Wembley. I think he had 4 or 5 sellout dates.
Once you've had the phenomenal success of something like Thriller, how do you ever eclipse that? And you know, it's like they always say with films, you know, the sequel is never as good as the original. And I think there was a sense of that with the Bad album. Although lots of hit singles came from it and there was a lot of success, but never really reached the heights of Thriller. And I think Michael Jackson was disappointed by that. And I don't think anything Michael could ever have done, any body of work he could ever produce, would ever come close to Thriller. And I think that must have had an effect, because if you've done your best work, where do you go from there?
Michael's next album was bravely entitled Dangerous. It was a very strong album, but it failed to live up to the all-round brilliance of Thriller and Bad. For the first time, Michael's record sales began to slow. However, the real problems came when the first rumours of child abuse allegations were to blight Michael's life and damage his reputation forever.
Michael spent so much time talking about children and how they should be nurtured and loved, and spreading this message of charity and you know, back to basics when it comes to looking after and loving children and the importance of the family. And I think for someone like him to be accused of child abuse would have been profoundly devastating.
It's likely to trigger stress, anxiety reactions, questioning the people around him, questioning whether he can trust people around him.
And I think it took its toll on his health. It certainly hit his record sales, and people didn't want to be associated with him. And that was a real problem, because, you know, he really fell from grace, I think, and all these people who are said to adore Michael Jackson, all the pop stars and actors that always celebrated Michael Jackson, just stopped saying anything in support of him. It's like all his friends abandoned him, and I think that's got to be really hard for anyone to take. But when it's Michael Jackson, it's, you know, on a different scale to you or I.
Matters took a turn for the worst when LaToya and her husband weighed in with some very strong accusations of their own.
Well, I must tell you that this is very difficult for me, that Michael is my brother. I love him a great deal, but I cannot and I will not be a silent collaborator of his crimes against small, innocent children. And if I remain silent, then that means that I feel the guilt and the humiliation that these children are feeling, and I think it's very wrong. I have seen checks payable to the parents of these children. And I don't know if these children were apparently bought to the parents by Michael or not. But I have seen these checks, and I've seen these checks through my mother. She's shown me these checks that Michael have written to these children, and it's for a great amount. And I'm not speaking pennies. The sums are a very, very large amount. And this is my first time talking about it, and I never want to speak about it. I never want to say anything about it. But I think it's sad, because I am a victim myself, and I know what it feels like. And these kids are going to be scarred for the rest of their life, and I don't want to see any more innocent small children being affected this way. I love Michael very dearly, but I feel even more sorry for these children, because they don't have a life anymore. They don't. Now you stop and you think for 1 second, and you tell me, what 35-year-old man is going to take a little boy and stay with him for 30 days, and take another boy and stay with him for 5 days in a room and never leave the room? How many would take little kids and do that are 9, 10, 11 years old? I love my brother, but it's wrong. I don't want to see these kids hurt. I've been hurt by it too.
There's been 2 major kidnap attempts on LaToya that were stopped, that were paid and financed by Michael Jackson.
Michael obviously, like we all do, relied on his family members to support him and to nurture him through difficult times. So when someone as close as your sister comes out and publicly accuses you of being a child molester, something that he always vehemently denied, it was a terrific blow to his own self-esteem.
I think the speculation around the child abuse allegations was already very damaging to his mental state, and I think having someone so close to you say that they thought that there could be some truth in it, I think that's got to be very hurtful and very damaging further still.
Later on, it came out that LaToya's husband had coerced her into making that statement, and I think at that point Michael Jackson did actually forgive LaToya.
But really added weight, I think, to the common belief that Michael Jackson was potentially guilty of these crimes. If his own sister thinks he's guilty, then really he's guilty, and that's the legacy, I think, from what she did. That it really changed people's opinion. People who were not sure, started to think that maybe Michael Jackson was capable of such things.
The fact that he was subsequently cleared by a court of law must have lifted a huge weight from his shoulders. And the fact is, if the court finds you innocent, you are innocent.
I think the child abuse allegations are highly significant to all the events that have taken place recently. I think that they've had a profound effect on both his health and his success, his finances, everything.
The stresses and strains of a very public life, combined with the legal battles, were just 2 of the factors which caused Michael to lapse into an addiction to painkillers. His long-term friend, Elizabeth Taylor, was on hand to help him through the experience.
At a time, we're told, when Michael became addicted to prescription drugs, it was Elizabeth who stood up and helped to take some of the pressure off his shoulders by accepting the burden of the fact that she would have to go out there and publicly tell the world the kind of pressure that he was under.
People can build up a tolerance to the medication that they take, and therefore it doesn't affect them as much as it did previously, so it becomes the norm to try and increase the dosage.
I have suffered and dealt with the same kind of medical problem now afflicting my friend Michael Jackson. Because of that, and because of our friendship, when Michael's doctor called to ask if I could help, I was glad to intervene. I traveled to Mexico City, where I saw for myself that Michael was in desperate need of specialized medical attention. Because of my own experience with addiction to prescription medicines, I was able to make a number of calls in search of the best and most appropriate treatment for Michael, and he is now undergoing such treatment in Europe. Out of respect for his privacy, which I know to be extremely important at this time, I have not spoken publicly about our movements or about Michael's exact location. And because of my regard for him and my concern for his health, I will continue to be silent. I will only repeat that I am a friend of Michael Jackson's, and I love him like a son, and I support him with all my heart.
In speaking out on behalf of Michael, she did him an enormous favour, and she understood, as someone who'd been under those pressures, how important it was that she reached out and did something to help him. She also understood that it was necessary to explain to the world exactly what Michael was going through.
Michael and Elizabeth sort of shared the fact that they were both propelled into the spotlight from a young age. They were both childhood stars. They both grew up in the spotlight of the media.
And they must find this very difficult, and we know that many child actors struggle in later life when they realise that all of these things that have happened to them that aren't conventional have taken their toll. You know, Macaulay Culkin and Drew Barrymore, exposed to an adult world at a very young age, and it's very difficult for young minds to cope with that kind of thing.
Elizabeth, to a lesser extent, because she didn't have, you know, the TV coverage that Michael had and things like the internet that Michael had later on in his life. And I think it was only natural that if they were both in that environment and probably living quite close to each other in the, sort of the California area, that they would probably come together and be friends. And they also shared some quite tragic attributes as well, you know, rumours of sort of addiction to prescription drugs and alcoholism and things like that, which also perhaps unfortunately creates a link between the two.
There were always people interested in their life and media interested in what they were up to.
But I think that they also had in common that they were both reclusive characters and slightly eccentric.
Well, he's one of my closest friends, and we know more about each other probably than any two people. And I love him and he loves me.
Initially, Michael was able to overcome the child abuse allegations by simply dipping into his immense fortune and paying his opponents to go away. This gave the troubled star the time and space he needed to get back into the studio and create the History album.
History was mainly a compilation album of some of his greatest hits from Thriller, Off the Wall and Bad. And also there was some new material. In that context, having all those great works together was fantastic for fans.
I don't think it quite got the recognition because there wasn't as much new material as Michael Jackson's diehard fans had hoped for, and therefore they weren't entirely pleased.
History included the classic track entitled The Earth Song.
Well, the Earth Song is a very special song for the whole world, and I think that was Michael's reason for writing it, because he has a foundation called Heal the World, and it's very important for everybody, all walks of life, to really take a listen to this song and really listen.
I think Michael was in a way sort of tapping into a sentiment at the time, and a sentiment that continues now, of green issues and perhaps thinking a bit beyond ourselves and looking at other parts of the world where people are less fortunate, where the environment plays such a devastating role in people's lives, famine, drought. And I think he just wanted to sort of point those issues out. And in his role as a sort of global music superstar, he could perhaps do that to a greater extent than even politicians could or can.
The politicians all over the world, they are for themselves, but if you're put in a political position, then your job is to service the people and service the country, and that's why we have so many people dying and starving, because the politicians aren't doing what they're supposed to do.
Earth Song was a great piece of music. It was kind of different. It was quite sort of racy, if you like. It took a few risks, and it was a real statement from Michael, that I guess he still had it as a star, because I think his career was slowly starting to trail off at that point.
Some of the publicity stunts that he carried out, like floating the huge statue of himself down the Thames, was seen in some quarters as being a little bit vulgar and arrogant. And I think Michael Jackson's vanity took over at times. I think he was trying to establish himself as a legend, but he didn't really need to do that, because he already was, and he always would be. I don't think he quite had that belief in himself that he was as magnificent as he was. I think the best thing about History, that there was a tour that came along with it. Michael Jackson toured, and he hadn't toured since the Bad Tour, I think, in the late 80s. And I think that's what Michael Jackson was all about. He was touring. That's why Michael Jackson was who he was, because he was the showman.
Sadly, there was to be no respite for Michael. The increasingly frail star was drawn into a further protracted court battle concerning fresh allegations of child abuse.
No comment. No comment. No comment. No comment.
Michael's next album was Invincible. The title proved to be highly appropriate, as Michael was found not guilty of all charges against him. To add to his declining state of mental and physical health, Michael also had to contend with money worries caused by his lavish lifestyle.
Hey, how you doing? Yeah. Break it out. Oh.
In an effort to put the past behind him and restore his crumbling fortunes, Michael agreed to perform at a long run of concerts in London's O2 Arena.
It's possible that Michael Jackson had far too many commitments with his charity work and his expectant fans and producing new music, new material. And he was never going to be able to achieve all those things. He was never going to be able to fulfill all of his obligations to everybody. And this of course causes huge, intense pressure.
I think it's difficult to know whether he would ever have managed to do those 50 dates. It's a long stint for anyone to do, and for someone that was clearly as unwell as he was, it would have been very strenuous on him.
A man at 50 years old who isn't in the greatest shape, who's on medication, is seen out with a walking stick, and someone like that who hasn't performed anywhere near that magnitude for many, many years, to suddenly come out of the blue and perform 50 nights of rigorous singing and dancing, that's going to be a struggle for any man. But Mick Jagger does it, and he's 400 years old or something. So I suppose it's possible, and the thing about that is that it's Michael Jackson, so anything's possible with Michael Jackson.
From the rehearsal footage and from the confidence in his voice when he appeared at the O2 Arena in 2009 to announce the tour, he seemed really eager and enthusiastic about going on tour and performing to thousands of people in sell-out dates.
I genuinely believe that he did want to do it. He was obviously training and getting ready to perform again.
I think the key area with Michael Jackson is that he was never going to eclipse his previous triumphs. That's the key area. That's really what I think brought about his downfall.
Sadly, the strain of the rehearsals proved too much for Michael. On the 26th of June 2009, Michael died of a massive heart attack. A subsequent autopsy revealed he'd been pumped full of prescription drugs. The world had lost a truly great star.
I think there'll always be speculation surrounding Michael Jackson's death. There'll be conspiracy theories. There'll be people who don't believe he's died. It's always the case when high-profile figures like Michael Jackson die in sudden circumstances. Whether we really ever find out what happened, well, who knows?
I don't think we'll ever find out what happened to Michael Jackson. I think even if we had film footage of the whole event, that wouldn't stop the conspiracy theorists, quite frankly. I think that people will make their own minds up, and that's that. I think what's really interesting here is that a lot of the negativity surrounding Michael Jackson seems to be fading since his death. A lot of people are coming out of the closet and admitting to being Michael Jackson fans again, which is great. And I think that the longer the time passes, the more Michael Jackson will just be about the music and the performance and what he gave, and all those negative things will just disappear.
He went through 2 high-profile child abuse cases where he was found to be not guilty, and support for him didn't tail off after that. In fact, if anything, it grew again, and he released greatest hits albums.
I'm honored to be in Japan again, and I'm very happy to be among the Japanese people because I really love them very much. I really do. Thank you for your loyalty.
And the fact that his This Is It tour sold out many times over just proves what a global superstar he was, and probably will continue to be long after his death.
He transcended generations. There was something about him that appealed to kind of every generation. He had such a unique voice. His dancing was just amazing. It was something completely different that people hadn't seen before.
And he meant so much to so many different people in terms of the charity work he did alongside the singing, and as a performer and inspiration for other artists in years to come.
Everybody has so much respect for him because he's so talented, and his talent is so wonderful. It will never die. He will never die. He's amazing. Can't nobody touch Michael Jackson. Right.
He was just so diverse. I mean, he was a singer, a dancer, a superstar.
These days, bands are so contrived, and you know, it's all manufactured, and there was none of that with Michael Jackson. I mean, potentially in the early days with Motown, there was a lot of support there and help and stuff, but I think he really came into his own. He really invented being Michael Jackson.
I think it is quite a rare thing to see someone that is a complete package, a composer, a dancer, a singer. He had a unique style in each area, and I don't think there are many artists out there prior or since that have come anywhere close.